If you've been watching my channel for a while now, you know that I've been following the Apothecary Diaries with you. But the deeper I got into this anime, the more unsettling it became. I've only finished up to episode 12 of season 1, yet so many of its details feels like hidden messages about our real world. Maomao's experiences as the main character remind me of this real-life conspiracy that lasted over the recent 100 years. One so massive, it quietly affected 3 generations. Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Zs. So today, let me peel back the layers and show you how the Apothecary Diaries, despite looking like a simple historical anime, actually hides a terrifying truth. One that mirrors one of the most shocking global scandals in recent history. Just to give you a short background for those that never watched the anime, the Apothecary Diaries follows a protagonist named Maomao. She works as an apothecary in the Imperial Palace in ancient China, and she uses her knowledge about medicine and herbs to help the concubines of the palace to figure out their chronic illnesses. This show is about her character's growth and the obstacles that she has to deal with in the face of palace bureaucracy and power struggles. So you can see here, the 2 characters on screen are Lady Lihua and Lady Gyokyo. They're both concubines of the emperor. They look fine, no visible wounds, no injuries, but they just look pale, they're dizzy, nauseous, and they're actually slowly dying. At this point, even though the people in the anime don't know what the cause of this is, but as audience, we know that they're being poisoned by lead. And lead is not something that this anime made up. It is an actual poison that existed in our history for up to 5,000 years. In ancient Rome, people used lead extensively. Nowadays, we know that it's toxic to our body, but because these toxic effects appear so slowly, they often take months or even years. Back then, no one recognized the danger. So even when someone has symptoms that are really apparent for lead poisoning, like nausea, vomiting, and fatigue, very few people connected that with lead. One really famous physician, Hippocrates, you've probably heard of the Hippocratic Oath that all physicians have to take. Yeah, that's from him. So he actually noticed that a lot of lead miners had these kind of symptoms, and he actually suspected this was lead poisoning. But because the evidence was lacking and lead was just such a popular substance because of how much there is and how easy it is to make lead into different shapes, the ancient Romans ignored his warnings. So because of this lack of understanding, the really famous Roman aqueduct system, which is the pipes they use for water, are actually built with lead pipes. And at the same time, the Romans actually directly ate lead in something called the sugars of lead. And this is called sapa. They would boil wine in lead pots, and this actually made the wine taste sweeter. And this process was really expensive, so only the Roman aristocrats could afford it. And if I were a Roman aristocrat, it would be really bad news for me because I have the biggest sweet tooth possible, and I would probably end up with a very low IQ. Because later studies found that lead actually impairs cognitive development, leading to lower intelligence. And I'll come back to talk about how our generation has been affected by this as well. And medically speaking, the reason why lead is so dangerous is because it's a really good trickster. It pretends to be calcium in our body. And in scientific terms, we call that molecular mimicry. Both calcium and lead have divalent cations. That means they have a +2 charge, which means when lead enters our bloodstream, our body can't recognize that it's lead. It only sees that it has a +2 charge. So lead looks exactly like calcium, and your body welcomes it in. It lets lead flow into your muscles, your heart, your nerves, and even your brain. These are the same places that calcium is supposed to go, but lead doesn't do calcium's job. Instead of activating certain signals, lead actually blocks them. So normally, calcium is like the body's courier. For example, with each heartbeat, each nerve signal, calcium is the substance that carries these messages in and out of the cells. But when lead gets there, it actually interferes with these signals. It's kind of like someone replaced your home Wi-Fi router with an identical looking one, but it's fake. It's just sitting there, but you can't connect to the signal. And your body, trying to be helpful, actually makes it worse. Since your body thinks this is calcium, it actually stores lead in the bones. Once it's in there, it doesn't leave easily. Lead in the bones has a half-life of up to 30 years, which means it will take your body 30 30 years just to get rid of half of it. So even if you stop being exposed to lead today, the amount that's still trapped in your body will slowly still leak out into your bloodstreams, causing more and more damage. And these damages include affecting your digestive system. Lead will irritate your gut, causing those symptoms like nausea, vomiting. It can cause damage in the blood, and it affects the assembly of hemoglobin, so it can lead to anemia. In the heart, it can disrupt the heart rhythm and weakens the heart muscles, but the most damaging place is in our brain. Lead is one of the few poisons that can actually cross something called the blood-brain barrier. This is our body's ultimate defense system for the brain. Lead is able to cross this barrier, especially in children, because in children, their barriers are still leaky and isn't fully developed yet. And this is why in the Apothecary Diaries, you can see that both Lady Lihua and Lady Gyokyo have newborn babies. Their babies ended up being a lot sicker than their moms, even though the lead poisoning came from the white lead powder that the moms would use on their faces. A lot of other poisons can't actually do this. For example, botulism. This is a poison that also gets a mention in this anime. One of the emperor's other concubines, called Lady Lishu, has been poisoned by botulism when she was a child. This was due to accidentally eating honey that was contaminated with this toxin, and she was told to never eat honey again. Botulism is a poison that can quickly paralyzes the entire body, especially in babies, and causing them to die. But even such a deadly poison like this can't actually cross the blood-brain barrier. And this is why children with even really low levels of lead exposure have low IQs, and in schools, they're seen as children with learning difficulties or attention deficits. But in reality, they aren't just lazy or bad at school. There's something more sinister going on. In the Apothecary Diaries, the lead poisoning came from the lead white powder, which Lady Lihua uses pretty much daily. Even though she was obviously sick, she was still alive because lead as an inorganic compound actually doesn't absorb through the skin that well. But a newer, man-made organic lead compound can be so easily absorbed through the skin. And this is actually the main villain in our video today, something that ended up poisoning up to billions of people in the world. It can be absorbed so much easier by our body, and it can be spread to all the organs much easier and much more dangerously. And unfortunately, it was added to one of the most commonly used products in our daily life, gasoline. This compound is tetraethyl lead. Tetraethyl lead was discovered about 100 years ago in 1921. It was discovered by this really famous chemical and mechanical engineer called Thomas Midgley Jr., who was later named as someone, and I quote, that had the most adverse impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in Earth's history. So back then, cars used spark ignition internal combustion engines, and the fuels we used to use caused these mini explosions in the engines, so we constantly hear this really annoying loud noises and the metallic pinning sounds. So Thomas, being the smart engineer he is, he discovered tetraethyl lead. It was kind of like a booster for the engine, and it resolved this knocking problem altogether. But at this point, everyone already knew lead was poisonous. So Thomas and the company that he worked for, which was General Motors, actually hid lead from the name. Instead of using the word tetraethyl lead in all of their branding and reports, they just called it ethyl, which actually sounds pretty harmless, right? Plus, this liquid actually is colorless and has a really fruity and pleasant smell. So this whole disguise made ethyl really widely adapted by the oil companies and the car companies. And just like the concubines in the Apothecary Diaries that used white face powder with added lead to make them look more elegant, we added lead to our gasoline to make it more advanced. But just like in every good mystery story, things are never as simple as they look. Behind this so-called upgrade, there's always something nasty waiting in the shadows. And basically, the whole world was lied to because of General Motors' clever marketing to hide this nastiness. But there were warning signs early on. At one point, Thomas himself, the guy who invented this, he had to take a long vacation in Miami to recover from lead poisoning himself. And he later admitted, word for word, "I find that my lungs have been affected and that it's necessary to drop all the work and get a large supply of fresh air." Also, around the same time, the workers in the production plants in New Jersey, they started going insane. Literally, they developed hallucinations, convulsions, and aggressive behavior, and 5 of them actually died. The press back then even called this the loony gas event, just like what we see in the Apothecary Diaries. In episode 1, the concubine Lady Li Hua is out in public, but she is in a highly irritable and emotional state. She even publicly slaps and yells at another concubine. But despite all of these warning signs, tetraethyl lead wasn't just used. It was everywhere. Cars, buses, planes, lawnmowers, everything was run on it. And basically from the 1950s to the early 2000s, every time an engine run, a poof of lead-dusted air would come out of that engine. Children that played around the block inhaled it. Adults on their way to work inhaled it. So if you were born around this time, it's almost certain that you were also exposed to this as a child. And even if you didn't live in a big city, you still weren't safe. Lead was already seeped into the air, into the water, and everything that we breathe and eat. In the Apothecary Diaries, even after being warned that the powder was poisonous, not everyone listened, especially Lady Li Hua's servants. They continued using this poisonous powder on their master, thinking that it would make her look more elegant. And this is why we see a few episodes later, Lady Li Hua became even weaker and almost died. This is just like what happened in the real world. There were initial concerns from scientists and medical professionals to say that this product might be poisonous. But instead of stopping production of lead gasoline, Midgley actually decided to take it upon himself and prove to everyone that this product was safe. So during a press conference, he held out a bottle of tetraethyl lead, poured it all over his hand, and even took a deep inhale in front of everyone. And he told the reporters that he could do this every day, no problem. Spoiler alert, he was wrong. He later had to take another leave of absence from work because of lead poisoning again. In the Apothecary Diaries, our protagonist Maomao was not just smart, she also had a no-nonsense attitude. So when she realized that Lady Li Hua's servants were still using this powder, even after she already warned everyone about it being toxic, and even Lady Li Hua herself has obviously become so weak she can't even get out of bed or eat anything, she yanks the servant that's been using the lead powder, grabs the powder, dumps it onto her head, and she very seriously says to everyone, "This is poison." Back in the real world, we have someone just as smart and just as brave like Maomao to fight back. His name was Claire Cameron Patterson, and he was a very famous American geochemist. We'll call him Professor Maomao for the rest of this video, so it's easier for you to remember. Professor Maomao didn't actually come from an academia family. His father was a mailman, and his mother sat on the board of the local school board. But because he grew up on a farm, he actually spent a lot of time doing hands-on learning, and he learned a lot of things about the world that kids in the city don't learn. And that started his curiosity about science. He graduated high school when he was 16, then he went to his local hometown college, but he didn't just stop there. He went to the University of Iowa to get a master's degree in molecular spectroscopy, and at this point, World War II just broke out and he was actually employed on the Manhattan Project, and after World War II, he came back to Chicago to do a PhD at the University of Chicago. So when he was conducting all of these experiments in the really old laboratory at this university, he discovered something really weird. There was a lot of lead contamination everywhere in this laboratory, including on his own hair. This was such a shocking finding. Why would there be lead everywhere? So from this point on, he made it his lifelong mission to figure out lead contamination as his career. And the best way to do that, he figured, was to figure out the lead composition in the layers of Earth. We all know that carbon dating can be used to figure out the age of old rocks or fossils, but Professor Maomao was looking to see if we can actually use lead to also tell us the age of the Earth. His logic was that uranium can decay into lead, so he was going to find the content of lead in different layers of Earth. But when he started doing that, he noticed something really strange. for some reason, there was just so much lead in the environment that it contaminated all of his samples, and it made all of his data look really skewed. So grabbing onto this new discovery, in 1964, he flew all the way to Greenland and he started drilling. This is because he wanted to take ice core samples of our Earth. When ice freezes, they actually trap tiny air bubbles. So the deeper we go in the layer of ice, the older that air is being trapped there. And the ice layer that's close to the top, that's fresh air from more recent years. And he wanted to see, is there a difference between the fresh air versus the really old air? And his findings confirmed his worries. The thing that he really wished weren't true is now proven. The atmospheric level of lead has steadily increased ever since we started using tetrahedral lead in gasoline. The timeline matched perfectly. So he immediately started devoting all of his time and energy to try to get tetraethyl lead banned. But just like our protagonist Maomao in the anime that faced court bureaucracies and power struggles, our Professor Maomao faced even stronger oppositions. I mean, let's just look at his opponents. He's basically taking on the entire Ethyl Corporation, the entire industry of lead gasoline, and the legacy of the inventor of tetrahedral lead. At this point, Thomas Midgley Jr. has already passed away. He only lived for 55 years. He didn't die of lead poisoning. That would be quite ironic. But either way, Professor Maomao faced strong backlash for trying to tell the truth. There were several organizations that were supposed to be neutral or even supportive of his efforts that ended up refusing his contracts. And he was even excluded a seat on the National Research Council panel for lead atmospheric contamination, which he was a leader in. And his opponent's arguments were this. This level of lead that we see everywhere, you know, in our blood, in our air, in our soil, that's just normal. Because these levels are so common, it must be harmless. But Professor Maomao called out their BS and said, just because this is commonplace doesn't mean it's harmless. He insisted that this now normal level of lead that we see everywhere, this is because of the introduction of tetrahedral lead in our gasolines. Although Professor Maomao couldn't slap his opponents like we see in the anime, but the evidence that he presented really felt like a slap in the face. He was able to find lead in our food, 4,600 times more than baseline. He even dug out a 1,600-year-old Peruvian skeleton and compared the levels of lead and calcium in our modern human bodies versus this old skeleton. And he found that there was a 1,000-fold increase in lead where calcium levels stayed the same. And finally, after 20 years, in 1986, the US finally banned lead gasolines in cars. But as we can tell in Apothecary Diaries, change doesn't just happen overnight. Our Maomao has already warned everyone about lead poisoning in episode 1. And even though court has already issued a ban, in episode 4, we still see it being used. And in reality, this was the same. It wasn't until January 1st, 1996, 10 years after the ban was issued, that all the cars in the US stopped using lead gasoline. And Professor Maomao's influence didn't just stop in the US, his movement actually led to a worldwide ban on lead gasoline. The UK stopped using it in January 1st, 2000, China stopped using it July 1st, 2000, and the very last country on earth, Algeria, only stopped using it in 2021. That was just 4 years ago. But the damage was already done. Our generation, the Gen X, Millennials, and early Gen Zs, we all grew up in this era of lead gasoline use. This headline right here says 20th century lead exposure damaged Americans' mental health. And the researchers found that more than half of the US population had clinically concerningly high levels of lead in their blood when they were children. And this likely resulted in the lower IQs and the high mental health problems. So like I said earlier, this potentially affected a lot of us. So the next time your parents complain that you're lazy, has no attention span, and won't listen to them, you can just smile and say, sorry mom, it's not me, it's the lead. And when you go back and watch the Apothecary Diaries again, you might now think that this is no longer just a cute mystery show about ancient China and court politics. It's a mirror of our own history. How something so small, like the white lead powder or just a drop of gasoline, can rewrite history for humanity. So maybe Maomao wasn't just trying to solve palace mysteries. She was actually trying to warn us that every era has its own poison, and every generation needs someone as brave as her to stand up and say, this is toxic. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more contents like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!